And good evening and welcome to this week's edition of the Kaufman Corner. Much to get to and a guest we'll talk about here in a second. One of our good friends joining Rany Jazayerli and myself. Do we believe that since the firing of Dayton Moore, the Royals are moving in a new and better direction? We're going to ask Joe Sheehan from the Joe Sheehan Baseball Newsletter. What does he think it is? Is it just a cosmetic change or has real change actually occurred? Is there optimism regarding the Royals' young pitching now that they've overhauled the coaching staff? Do you think they're simply not talented enough? We're going to get Joe's thoughts on that. What should the Royals do with Adalberto Mondesi besides paying $3 million for 1 year, obviously? Rumors the Red Sox are interested in him to replace Trevor Story for this year. What's a realistic timetable for contending? What should the expectations be for 23? What constitutes a red flag for the J.J.Picollo situation? We'll talk about the arbitration cases. It's all coming up right here on the Kaufman Corner.
This is the Kaufman Corner Podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kaufman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kaufman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
And good evening. If you're catching us via the podcast, we do stream live normally at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, but because we had big football doings for some of our folks that are probably Royals and Chiefs fans wanting to know how it's going to shake out, we're broadcasting here at about 10:30 Central Time. And, of course, the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, is with us. Rany, we have a guest, one of our favorite baseball people. We love Joe Sheehan, the Joe Sheehan Baseball Newsletter. We love everything about him right up until the point that he starts talking, right?
That's a great summation of my relationship with Joe Sheehan.
Most of the women I know, too.
So Joe and I have known each other for 30 years. 30 years next month, actually. And in those 30 years, I think we've agreed about the Royals maybe once, twice, something like that. But we've had a relationship going back to college when he was at USC and I was in Baltimore. So it started with us long distance phone calls back in the day when you actually had to pay by the minute for your phone calls, and it's lasted till today. We started Baseball Prospectus together along with three other guys back in 1995, I guess, and somehow we are still friends. We still talk to each other, or certainly at least text with each other a lot. So I'm delighted to have him on board for the show today, even though I am sure he is going to annoy me with his Royals takes like he always does, even if he's right. And he usually is.
One of the things we agree on is that 2014-15 was a fluke. You finally come around to me on that. Say it.
We also agree that the 2014-2015 Royals won the pennant both years, and they won the World Series. Okay, as long as we're in agreement about that, then yes, I will agree. In the light of hindsight, yes, it was probably a fluke, which is why we are here today talking about the J.J.Picollo era and not the Dayton Moore era.
Which is true, and I will if people, I had both Rany and Joe on. They came to town in the fall. Of course, Rany's based in Chicago. That's his home base. Joe is a New Yorker. I don't know if you can pick up on the accent yet, but that's where he is from. And they came together to eat a lot of barbecue, had a lot of Joe's Kansas City barbecue, and take in a lot of baseball. And they did both. To their credit. And we discussed a lot of things at that time. And one, the flukiness, was it fluke? That was a big subject that went round and round. And Rany finally had to give in at least a little. Would that be fair?
No, it definitely fair. I was holding out for a long time, but come on, after 7 years, and we are, the 2022 Royals were what they were. At some point, you have to accept the evidence in front of you.
Yeah, that's where we sit today.
That's all I need to hear, guys. Have a good night. Thanks for having me.
Joe got what he came for, and now he's going to run. Listen, we do like the exercise here for us, and I think for Royals fans, is to hear an outsider's view, right? To like we can lose sight of the forest through the trees, or the trees through the forest. I forget which way that phrase works, and I think it is good to get somebody who is knowledgeable about baseball, which Joe certainly checks that box, but then doesn't come at it with maybe the emotion, the heart. That fans like Rany and I theoretically would. So let's start with it. Do you believe, like when you came to town, Dayton Moore, I think was still there, was he not, Rany?
Yes, it was shortly thereafter that he was
okay.
let go.
What do you think, Joe? The Dayton Moore's been let go. Are they moving in a better direction right now with the changes that they've made?
There's an argument that you're not going backwards, so standing still is better. I don't think there's any question, though, that this has been a standing still kind of offseason for the Royals. When I was there in September, there was a lot of optimism. Rany and I talked to a bunch of fans that weekend, and you got the sense, okay, Moore's probably going to go. Cal Eldred is almost certainly going to go, and we're going to take this step forward. And Ryan Yarbrough, Jordan Lyles, I think that's the extent of the winter so far, which is fair only in that they have a lot of position players. So I didn't necessarily go out expect them to be a player in the position player market. I wanted them to sign Trey Turner. There was probably never going to do that. But I think there's some disappointment that they haven't done more on the pitching side. They have a lot of young pitchers, but I don't think they have anybody except maybe Singer who rises to the level of a number 2. So getting into the starting pitching market might have been a play for them. And for them to come out of this first season, be at past Moore with J.J. Completely in charge, I think it's fair to be a little disappointed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where we are, Rany, right? Like disappointment. I don't think either one of us is doing any bragging about what's been done so far. The question, I guess, is, I mean, do they need to stop and take a breath with new people, new pitching coaches, and evaluate everything that's gone on? Is it possible that that's what this is? Is not really a just standing still or staying the course. It's a matter of getting the new people in and letting them at least get to work with them. And maybe reality is, listen, we don't want to cut loose of anybody that we think is good. Better to not make that mistake. We can always get around. We don't think we're right there. I think the comments of J.J.Picollo at his press conference made it clear that he didn't think that they were on the cusp of winning a championship, right? So if you're not one move away, then why not move deliberately, make sure of what you have, assess everything with these new people, which there are new pitching people that have been brought in, and then begin to do something maybe in spring training. Maybe it's at the trade deadline. Maybe you have to wait a whole year. I mean, is it, are we being too generous if we say we've got to give them the whole season to immerse whatever changes, limited that they were, happen, and fully assess what they've got?
Well, whether it's a question or not, this is the way it's happened, right? I mean, there's nobody left really to go out and get in free agency. I don't see them making a major trade acquisition. This is the path they've chosen, which is to say, we're going to run back most of the roster from last year and give the new manager and the new pitching coach an opportunity to evaluate the talent. I won't say JJ's not new. He's in a different chair now, but he obviously knows what he has there. And kind of say, okay, what are we keeping? And what are we going to try to trade or let go or replace after the 2023 season? I don't think there's any question. In September, I expected a little more aggressiveness. And what we've gotten now is this, as you say, Soren, is kind of a reset and saying, hey, look, this is what we have. Let's give the new guys a chance to play with it and see where we are. I can defend it. I mean, I was the guy who wanted them to sign Trey Turner, which was always probably a pipe dream. But in terms of how do you accelerate the process? Yeah, going out and getting one of the best players in baseball would have been the way to do that, especially when you look at next year's free agent market. It's going to be very hard to get that kind of transformational talent, that kind of 6-win talent. Shohei Ohtani, unless he has a hankering for barbecue that I don't know about, is probably not going to come to Kansas City. And there's a huge drop-off once you get past him. So that kind of player was available this winter. He's not available this winter. So you say, okay, look, we've got a bunch of young guys here. Let's figure out what we have. And again, it's not the worst idea. I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I still want to see what Quatraro and Okay, two things. Quatraro,
I think.
Quatraro. See, I keep putting the R in the wrong place, and I'm probably going to do that for a while. Quatraro, and I'm sorry, guys. I'm blanking on the new pitching coach.
Brian Sweeney.
Brian Sweeney, thank you. Give them a chance to see what they have here.
Yeah, This is more of almost a philosophical question, which ties into that, which is if you were to make a case for what the Royals have done this winter, I think the case is that they've come to the conclusion that Cal Eldred and their entire pitching instruction was so bad that the talent doesn't actually need to be upgraded. All they needed to do was to transform the way they are teaching pitching. And that explains the Brian Sweeney hiring of Zach Bove, I believe, is the assistant pitching coach. They brought in a couple of new coaches to the minor league system. Not a huge transformational change there, but certainly they are. There have been more changes to the pitching coach side of things this winter than in the last 5 years combined. And as somebody who was sitting shotgun on the fire Cal Eldred bandwagon for the last 3 or 4 years.
Shotgun.
I can't exactly argue with that approach, but philosophically, do you think? I mean, when you look at the players that the Royals have in, who are supposed to be the stars of this rotation, like the class of 2018, the draft class, not Singer, who's established, but everybody else basically: Daniel Lynch, Chris Bubich, Jackson Kowar, Jonathan Heasley, some of the other pitchers, Carlos Hernandez, who come through the farm system. Do you think these guys are actually talented enough that a massive upgrade in coaching and instruction can actually make the difference? Or do you think these guys, that the talent was sort of always overstated to begin with?
I'm leaning at that start of last year. I would have said, hey, I'm a big believer in this pitching staff. And by the end of it, I think you kind of start to say, okay, it looks like a lot of 4s and 5s here, and not a lot of guys who are going to front a rotation. Development's obviously been an issue, and I don't want to distract from that. But guys, Eno Saras of The Athletic, just a phenomenal analyst. He sent out some numbers back in December, and he has a metric called Stuff Plus, and you don't need to understand it completely. But basically, it's measuring the quality of the pitches, and every single Royal, Singer included, was actually below average, and some of them just had terrible, terrible numbers. So I do wonder if I overrated that pitching staff when I see numbers like that. And I said, this isn't gospel, but it is consistent with the performance that we've seen. And it does say that, hey, maybe this wasn't just a teaching issue. This was these guys aren't as good as we thought issue.
And I'll go you one more, Joe, when you bring up Eno Saras, who does do great work. And I had him on. He wrote a piece before the season basically saying there's not much stuff here. Right. He had all of them down. So this isn't just something that they looked like they had stuff and now they don't. So maybe we can get them back to that. Before they'd even failed this year, he was already predicting that they were not going to be good. Right. And he had, because I remember going through it and nobody ranked above, because we said, okay, 30 major league teams, 5 starters, 150 starters. Guys were ranking their highest guy, I think was Danny Duffy, who was gone and was at 115 or something. And then there are a bunch of guys in the 150s, 160s, 198. And so, the raw stuff wasn't saying they were going to be good. And I guess my question, kind of along with what Rany said, is when does that data get to the front office here? Right?
Now?
Isn't that something that has to be the wake-up call? And shouldn't there have been, alarm bells going on? I mean, that's all data that's everywhere, right? Every stadium has that. Every team has this data on every pitcher in baseball. So that all that stuff is from the cameras and everything that's in every stadium. There's no secret as to what you have, right?
What's the secret as to what you prioritize? And I could be misremembering. Going back, was it the Rustin Dodd piece earlier this year? Kind of digging in on some of the dysfunction within the Royals organization. I think what the Royals have valued are things that teams don't value as much anymore. The Royals are a bit of an outlier. They value fastball command. They don't care necessarily about the stuff so much as how you use it and how they're bringing up pitchers, certainly how they've drafted pitchers. You don't end up with stuff numbers like this among your top young pitchers if you're not drafting that type of pitcher instead of going out and getting the guy who throws 97 who you feel like you can teach. So I think some of this, you're going to have to unlearn a lot of behaviors that were put through the organization, under Moore, who 15 years of this is their way. You're going to have to change that. And I think this is one of the arguments against retaining J.J.Picollo, which was you really need to start over. You need to start valuing different things. You need to start selecting different players in the draft and chasing different types of talent internationally. And how much, JJ was part of that, I think is something you guys are closer to than I. But the argument is, do was retaining him going to retain some of these methods, or is he going to be part of the change? And that's something I think we just don't know yet.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think the concern is, I think the $1 million question to me is not simply did the Royals are the Royals pitchers suffering from a lack of talent as much as a lack of instruction, but with new coaching coming in, is it actually possible for their stuff to improve? Like that I think is the question that none of us know is, can you take a Daniel Lynch, who a lot of observers, even in the minor leagues, thought this guy was going to be a frontline starter, a number 2 starter. And suddenly, yes, not only is the performance at the major league level bad, but those underlying metrics are also bad. Is that, but if the scouting was so good, not just in college, but in the minor leagues, is that something that can also be blamed on the mix of pitches that he's using or the way he's gripping the pitches? I'm very curious to see early in the season if we actually see a bump in the stuff plus numbers. Like I would love to see Enos Harris's numbers in on May 1st. He'd be even though it's early, those numbers tend to stabilize fairly quickly. And if you are seeing a significant change, you might even get some data from spring training, because again, that data isn't dependent on what the batter is doing. So the fact that it's an exhibition environment doesn't matter, because you're just looking at the way the pitch is coming out of the pitcher's hand, the velocity, the movement, the location, and that stuff doesn't matter. He could be pitching to the little leaguers; it wouldn't matter. So I'm hopeful that we will actually see this. I've said this before. I feel like the Royals are almost engaging in an elaborate experiment, a scientific experiment, to find out just how important coaching can be at developing a pitcher, because they're keeping the pitchers and changing the coaches. It's not it's not the tactic I would have taken. But it might work. And if it doesn't, then at least they know it won't work.
And real quick before you answer that, Joe, I mean, that is somewhat scientific, right? If you change 4 variables, which one was it that changed something, right? If you want to knock something out, like if they don't get better, then they drafted the wrong guys, and there could be a firing, because that's what didn't change. Like the pitching coordinator is the same, scouts are the same. And so if they do this and they give new guys who understand how to spin it and all the different things that teams are doing now, if that doesn't work, then now it's time to blow up the rest of it, right? It could be, okay, you're now fighting, everybody else is now fighting for their job, and they're going to fight for their job based upon the performance of these same guys.
Well, I think that's what's going to happen. But there's also, I mean, you talk about changing variables. If the pitchers don't pitch well, okay, they're probably not good, but maybe Brian Sweeney isn't good at his job. I don't mean to say that that's definitely the case, but
right.
You have to also account for that possibility as well. But realistically, Rany, I think what I don't know, and it's dangerous to interpret other people's work, but my impression is that stuff is something that can be improved, but not radically changed. So talking about all these numbers that the Royals, and I don't know, can I link to the tweet in this thing here? The numbers were all between 90 and 100, or I think 88 and 100. Like Bubic was in there, Lynch, Singer, Heasley was in the tweet, a couple other guys. Jordan Lyles was in the tweet, and I know you guys are all excited about the Jordan Lyles ever. But I will say that, can we get those numbers from the mid 90s to the mid ones? Yeah. I don't think you're going to turn these guys into Spencer Strider. And I think that's the range we're talking about here. So could you take a collection of number 5 starters and turn them into a collection of 3/4s? Yes. I still don't know who the number 1 is, and I'm not entirely sure who the number 2 is. And I think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a roster full of players who can be the number 6 through number 26 guys on a good team, but I don't know who the number 1 through number 5 guys are. Well, you're going to say Bobby Witt, and that's fair. So Witt has that type of potential. I'm high on MJ Melendez. I think he could maybe be a core guy on a championship team, but I don't know that there's a pitcher on this staff who rises to that level, even if you improve them through new coaching.
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely a disconnect between the quality of pitching and the quality of hitting. I mean, you can make a case. Obviously, they have Bobby Witt, and they have nobody comparable on the pitching side. But you mentioned Melendez. I'm a huge Vinny Pasquantino honk here, and there even the second tier guys, the guys behind those
Massey and Eaton and guys like that.
Yeah, are comparable to the pitchers that they have at the top of their pitcher development. And I would also say that the hitters, given that they are, well, all the guys we're talking about are rookies, like they just had an insane rookie crop last year. I have a little bit more faith that the rookie hitters are likely to take at least 1 or 2 steps forward over the next 2 or 3 years, than necessarily the pitchers. So I'm not actually, I think we're focusing so much on the pitching side. The hitting side, I see the makings of. I'm not the term championship caliber in baseball is kind of a misnomer because, of course, championship.
Well, you don't have to be a championship caliber team to win a championship.
You need to be the 12th. You need to be the 12th best. You need to be the 6th best team in your league. And at this point, if the Royals are the 6th best team in the American League, the fans will be thrilled. The owner will be thrilled. Everybody will be thrilled. So I think there is the makings of a playoff lineup here.
Absolutely.
I agree that I don't see it on the pitching side. But
that's what you do. You build, and Ready. I'm sorry. Old habits, cutting you off. I know. But I want to. We talked about this 10 years ago in terms of the Cubs build, where they had, the new front office inherited Javi Baez, and they drafted Schwarber, and they drafted Bryant. You draft hitters and you buy pitchers. Mm-hmm. And the question, I think, that the $1 million question here is, will the Royals buy pitchers?
Well, they tried not to by drafting all those pitchers, and it hasn't.
It never works. Ask the Tigers.
Yeah. So, but let's go back, because you talk, Brady Singer, and I know what Eno has out there, but and Brady Singer, I think, has consistently every year performed with a better ERA than ERA plus, or excuse me, than fielding independent pitching. He always ticks out a little bit better. Now, second year, he was much worse. The fielding independent pitching said he was a lot better than that. But, I mean, are we really like a guy who can go out and have a FIP of 358, hang a 323 over 150 plus innings at age 25, and we're just like, that's it. He's a bore.
No, I don't think he's a 4. He's the one guy I think is above that level. I think he's a 2/3. I want to see him do it for multiple years. And the thing about outpitching your FIP, that trick basically works right until it doesn't. Ask Kyle Hendricks. Ask Matt Cain. Guys did it for 3-4 years, and all of a sudden when it goes bad in a hurry. So I'm generally of the opinion that that's not actually a skill. There's something in there. Maybe you get a lot of pop-up. Barry Zito was a high pop-up guy. That actually predates the spread of FIP, really. There's some other examples in the pool, but by and large, FIP is a pretty good predictor of what you are. You say 358 last year. It was 100 it wasn't a full season though.
153 innings, which is a full season by modern standards. I know.
You're not going to get me sidetracked on that tonight.
No. Well, the thing about Singer, though,
he does need to add some volume, and either add volume or lower the FIP to kind of be a 2. I think.
Well, I want to make the point actually. His career FIP is 384. That's actually lower than his career ERA of 4.01. Like, he has actually not been. Last year he was a little bit lucky, but he was a lot unlucky in 2021. Like Singer, if you look at the shape of his performance, it's pretty consistent with, his ERA and his peripherals line up pretty nicely. Okay. What is the anomaly, as you mentioned, is the stuff plus numbers. Right. And it's so hard for me to separate my fandom from analysis, but watching Brady Singer pitch, and I probably watched him throw more innings than any other Royal last year because he's actually fun to watch, is, he is so good at locating and the arm angle between his sinker and his slider. It's so hard for hitters, I think, to differentiate between those two pitches. I think you make a case that, stuff plus isn't necessarily catching everything he brings to the table, and that, in a sample size now of 346 career innings, his ERA plus being above league average, not dramatically so. But I think you can make a case he's an above average starter, even if his stuff numbers aren't quite there.
Right, because the tunneling is making up for the stuff.
Right. But we do, let's be honest, we can't just cherry pick the times we agree with it and then punt it on the ones like, no, it doesn't count on Singer.
We're in sports media. That's exactly what we can do. Fellas, hold on just a second here. It's getting cold in here. Excuse me.
Oh, great. Here we go. Oh, boy. Yep. So,
oh, boy.
Catching us via
He's really doing this, isn't he?
Joe is putting on a jacket because it's getting a little chilly. There's his. His Yankees jacket. So.
Oh, that's the team that's won fewer championships and fewer American League pennants in the last 12 years than the Kansas City Royals, right?
Sorry, I just put the earphones in. I wasn't really listening to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, since we're in the process of revealing our championship paraphernalia here, this is the perfect time for me to point out what I'm wearing, which is, that's right, proud wearer of a Northwestern
today.
sweatshirt. Yes, they did lose today, but can I make the point? And you're wondering why on earth
you want to brag about your kid? Go ahead. Brag
I'm allowed to. All right. Why am I wearing a Northwestern shirt? Partly because as a Royals fan, I know exactly what it's like to root for a team with a long, long history of futility, occasionally interrupted by shocking periods of brief success. But yes, I'm wearing this because daughter number 2 has been accepted at Northwestern. Will be starting there in September and is already an enormous fan of the basketball team. She was watching the game today. She's never watched basketball in her life, but she is all in on school spirit. It's actually really fun to watch. So yes, I have very few rules in life, but one of them is when one of my kids gets into college, I will wear their jersey on this show.
Am I
Which
supposed
baseball
to
team has a higher payroll, the Royals or Northwestern?
The Northwestern's definitely got more billionaires associated with it. Am I supposed to lean back and show what I'm wearing? A San Jose Sharks hoodie that I am now proud to say I am rooting for to tank hard to get the number 1 pick. They're bad and they're not bad enough, which is pissing me off. That's enough that I got to root for the Royals and the Sharks the same lifetime. What's going on here? I think it's because I was gifted Patrick Mahomes to the Kansas City Chiefs, and all other teams must suffer around it. And
it's worth it.
Yeah, I'll take it. It's pretty fun on that part of it. Listen, I mean, let's talk a little bit about what they are doing. And that's Adalberto Mondesi being signed to a 1-year, $3 million deal. Rany and I talked about Mondesi coming down the stretch, and I said, listen, if you're not going to walk on the guy, then sign him to multiple years. Like now, what's the point of 1 year? Like they're on a 1-year deal with Mondesi, there's no positive ending. Either he continues to be hurt and brings nothing to the ball club, at which point you tossed away $3 million and at-bats that could have gone to some other player, and there are a number of young middle infielders that the Royals could be getting at-bats for, or he ends up being tremendous and he walks, and you gain nothing. Like, to me, that is like paralysis, right? Like that's I don't understand. If you're still all in on this guy, then be all in on this guy and sign him and say, look, we're going to give you this year and that, at least 2 years, at least buy yourself some time for it to all come together. Or is it, as rumors have it, that, to the Boston Red Sox, trading him for whatever you can get at this point is the best case scenario.
Let me chime in real briefly, because when we did have that discussion, the thing I said was the problem with trying to trade him is that if you go out on the market and say, we want to trade Adalberto Mondesi, given his injury history, given his incredibly erratic performance history, the mere fact of putting him out there is likely to hurt his trade value, because every other team is going to be like, well, what do you know that we don't, that you want to move him? But the fact that the Red Sox, the rumors have started, the Red Sox themselves are interested. Like, it's different if a team comes to you expressing interest, because then that issue is not on the table. And the fact that the Red Sox do have this issue with Trevor Story, possibly not being available for much of the upcoming season, and a 1-year solution for them seems to make a lot of sense. To me, that presents an opportunity. And I'm very curious to hear, Joe, what you think the Royals should do, what you think he's worth, and what you think he is.
I'm sorry. I don't want to attack either one of you. Well, both, really. First of all, the player has agency. There's absolutely no reason for Adalberto Mondesi to sign any more than a 1-year deal, because you can't give him what he could possibly get. There's no reason for him to tie himself for his age 28 and 29 seasons, which would be incredibly valuable in free agency. There's no reason at all for him to sign a multiple year. I agree, Soren, that would be a good deal for the Royals. I also agree that it would be insane for Mondesi to sign that type of deal at this point in his career. As to the rest of it, I keep wanting to say raw. Adalberto Mondesi has a career 280 OBP, and he's played in 50 games the last 2 years. Just how much trade value do you think he has? He has a 280 career OBP. He has a career OPS lower than my credit rating. He's not a star. And you guys in Kansas City, and you in particular, Rany, talk about him like he's this player of incredible value. At his absolute best, he played 102 games, and he had a really big year. And that was 2019?
In my defense, I have not talked about him as having any value whatsoever since about April of last year. But
right.
yes.
But this is my point. I think he's a problem more than anything else. I think you bring him to camp, and if he plays well in the spring, I think you try to turn him into Chris Taylor or Daryl Thomas. And why am I blanking on anybody before 1980? I don't know. But that type of player, you turn him into Ben Zobrist and see if you can get some value out of him that way. But the idea that he's going to bring you much in trade, I mean, the Red Sox might be interested, but they're not giving you Tristan Casas for him. They're not giving you Brian Bello for him. They're kind of trying to get him for, some bottom, some B- prospect. There's just not a lot of trade value in that package, and there's no reason for him to sign. It's a difficult situation for the Royals. I completely get that. I think the bigger thing I'm concerned with, are they going to make the problem worse by sticking him, by turning him into somebody who he screws up the Bobby Witt problem, I guess is how I put it.
Listen, I don't remember when it was that I ejected on the Adalberto Mondesi experiment. It's years ago, at least 2, maybe 3.
So 50 games ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And I couldn't believe that they weren't just cutting bait, just whatever I can get. My problem for your problem, and sending him on, or making him just a minor piece of a bigger deal, right? Knowing that he has no value, but just here we muddied the waters in this trade where we got something that hopefully will end up being good for us, or that we believe is going to be good for us, and we can say Mondesi was part of it, when in reality he was just a throw in into the deal. This to me speaks to where I hope that ownership has either forced or J.J.Picollo wanted a different approach. But and we've talked about it a couple of times. I don't think John Sherman did the best job of phrasing it, but he said Dayton Moore always talked about what a championship club looked like. I think I'd like to take a look at what a wild card club looks like. And his point was not, I want to go to the wild card game, not win championships, right? That's why I say he didn't phrase it well. His point was Dayton Moore swings for tools. He likes toolsy guys. He likes upside guys. And, Dayton Moore will always talk, and he has many times, and I've talked to him since he left Kansas City, and he still talks about the championship players. And if you're going to find them, they're guys that you've got to find in the draft, and because the Royals aren't going to be able to sign those guys. And that's always been his MO. And he won 2 pennants in a World Series. I don't think he ever did that. I think he won kind of in spite of that, really, and for different reasons. But that was what drove him, and it did land him to Hosmer and Moustakas, and on the hitting side, some guys that maybe never lived up to their draft, number 2, number 3 overall for those guys, but did end up, being part of a championship club. And I get where John Sherman is saying, look, we don't have stop trying to win a championship because that's what's getting us 100 losses, right? When you swing and miss on that all the time, if we get some guys that are just good players, we can put a collection of good players together. We can be a wild card, get in the playoffs. And then I think that's where the point you're making earlier, it's like in Moneyball, Billy Bean, I can get you into the playoffs. At that point, it's just luck. I don't subscribe to that wholeheartedly. I think I think that's a bit of a cop out and a bit of an excuse for why Billy Bean has done. I think there's some things he can do better. We can talk about that some other time. But I mean, I do think that has to change. And I think don't we have to sit here and say, well, how much has it really changed if Mondesi's still here?
Again, I think they're trapped. Again, 1 year, $3 million isn't enough of an investment to worry about. You're holding on to him in the hopes that he does have the breakout. If he touches the upside that he showed back in 2004 or wherever it was, he had the good year. Then you do have a trade piece that is going to bring you more than it would today. If he does show out to be a power speed player, if he does show out to be a plus shortstop, if he does show that he can play multiple positions, I think that piece has more value. Or he does become somebody that then you might be able to go to and say, hey, look, here's 3 years and $53 million, or whatever it's going to be. But realistically, retaining the player now is essentially cost free other than the playing time. And that's something you can settle out in camp. But the idea that you would trade him now at pretty much the absolute nadir of his value, Nadir, one of those two, NADIR, there's just no point to it. And non-tendering him, Soren, I think that would have been a mistake as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's the cost $3 million 1 year. That's
what you make, right?
No,
isn't it? Yeah, but there is.
Why did we invite Joe on the show again?
Because I'm the only person who would do it this late.
Listen, I get it as you look at Adalberto Mondesi as a commodity. Which all baseball teams need to do more of. Now, the Royals love their players more than anybody else, and that's the thing
they need to stop doing.
Well, and that had served them well, right? Eric Eager, who's a sports analytics guy on the football side, my buddy who works now for Sumer Sports, used to be with Pro Football Focus, has a phrase he calls fake trophies. Running around like the Royals have one, and I put it to them. They're like, the Royals, they had 6 guys from one draft class all start a game. That's never been done before. And I said, and you're last. Like what? Like that irrelevant, right? They seem to fixate on things that don't matter. They do it time and time again. And celebrate getting a guy to the big leagues, not getting a guy to the big leagues and being good, just that he's there. This is another guy from the draft. And I get it, and I understand it because it is so hard to develop talent in baseball. I mean, not many guys make it. And so I understand that part of it. But that's where the culture change where it has to change. And to me, that's where it has, I'll just say this. If they had just walked on Mondesi at any time, it's a statement. We're not taking this crap. Right?
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think it's cutting off your nose to spite your face. I understand you wanting to change that culture. I don't think that's the place to make a statement.
And the question I have about Mondesi, when you say, the Royals aren't going to get Tristan Casas or Ryan Bella for him, I don't think anybody's expecting that. What I look at though is I look at like what the Marlins just did. They traded Miguel Rojas, right? Who's a starting shortstop.
He played baseball last year.
Yeah, he did. Doesn't have nearly the offensive upside, but a good defensive shortstop.
Do we know that? Rojas has had much better years than Mondesi.
Okay, well, this is the question I have. My point is, he had 1 year left on his contract. They traded him for not a top prospect. Jacob Amaya, I think, was top 10 to 15 in the Dodgers system, but that's a very, very good farm system, of course. And that's my argument is, yes, Mondesi has barely played the last 2 years, but the mere fact that the Red Sox have expressed interest is, I think, a testament to the fact that everybody knows there is talent there if this guy can stay healthy for more than 3 consecutive days. Do you think he could bring back a Jacob Amaya caliber prospect? And if so, do you think the Royals should take that? Like, I think a lot of Royals fans are at the point where they're willing to cash in, not just cut him, not just release him or take a non-prospect for him, but to take a guy who's a top 12 prospect in somebody else's farm system for him. I think Royals fans might settle for that, and I'm curious myself as to whether they should do that or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, would I have traded a Mondesi for Amaya? Yeah, I think I actually probably would have done that. I will say that Mondesi has more upside than Rojas, so that I could project in 3 months Mondesi quite possibly bringing back 3 months, 6 months, I guess, bringing back a lot more than that based on if he plays really well in the first half. We'll also say, though, is getting the 12th best prospect in the Dodgers organization is a lot different than getting the 12th best prospect in most other teams' organizations. One of the reasons this trade was made is that the Dodgers can look and say, we have all of this talent. We've got to figure out some way to do it. We don't want to spend money this winter. We're trying to get under the tax threshold. Let's trade our 12th best prospect for a stopgap shortstop solution, who we think is going to be better than Andres or Iglesias or any of the free talent out there, and Andrelton Simmons. I think the 12th best prospect in the Red Sox system is not Jacob Amaya. Casas, Duran's off the list now. Bello's off the list. I think Sedan Rafaela. I mean, you're not getting Marcelo Meyer. You're already down at number 3. You're talking about a guy who looks like a utility player in the majors. The 12th best prospect in that system is you.
Yeah. By the way, our podcast is brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the entire KC area. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, yes. No commissions, that's right. In-house crews, absolutely. And every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Tell them you heard about it on the Kaufman Corner podcast. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. We're talking with Joe Sheehan, who's with us here. I get all of what is being said and everything that's there. There is no way he has to play, and he has to play well to have any value whatsoever, right? But like the thing that to me is so frustrating is, why is this alleged new regime still staying the course? He's proven he can't get on base, which is the number one thing, right? Like, Joe, you're a Yankee fan. Do you have any interest in Adalberto Mondesi?
Well, no, but the Yankees have Anthony Volpe and Oswaldo Peraza right now. I mean, there's just no place to play him. Could I put Adalberto Mondesi on 10 different teams? Sure. You mentioned earlier, like, can we assemble some trade? Yeah, I can trade Mondesi, Drew Waters, and a pitching prospect to the Pirates for Mitch Keller. Now, the Pirates might not do that, but that's the kind of trade you want to make him. Mondesi on his own doesn't bring that back. But there are absolutely teams, especially bad teams, that could plug Mondesi in.
Well, and the second half to that question is like what this organization has to get to is when you get halfway through your time of control and you have not established yourself in a position, you're done having that position given to you. And you get a center fielder's mitt and you take your speed and your tools and you get the hell out to center field and you play some third base. And they never did that, right? It was always just a coddling of handing him shortstop, even when other guys, it started with giving him second base ahead of Whit Merrifield, and they continued to do that. Then it continued like when shortstop then did open up with Alcides Escobar, he was given shortstop, giving it back to him after Nicky Lopez was what Jeff Passan said on my show, definitively the man who should have won the Gold Glove in 20. I forget what year we are, 21. I should have been the Gold Glove shortstop. They, and I know he didn't have a great year this year with the bat. Maybe it's because they jerked him around and he didn't get to play shortstop every day. Maybe that was part of the problem. They gave it back to him just to start last year. Like that's the kind of thing that at some point results have to matter, and they don't seem to matter in this organization.
Well, this is where I think Mondesi is tied into the Bobby Witt issue, which is if you play Mondesi and you don't make him a utility guy, okay, he's probably got to play short because they have a bunch of options for second base. Okay, now if he's going to play short, Witt's got to play third. Now, I'm okay with that. But Witt then has to play 1,300 innings at third base. The one thing they have to do, and this is where I want to say we talked about this last spring, Rany, you make your decisions based around your best player.
Right.
So if Bobby Witt is the guy you have to set and forget, make him a shortstop, and then you and I argued about him at shortstop.
Right. This is the thing. We argue, should he be at short or third? The one thing we agreed on is wherever you put him, he needs to stay there and play
one position, 1,300 innings next year. Right. I don't care if it's short or third. I really don't, because I think you made an argument. I mean, I think he'd be a fantastic third baseman. I think he'd be a good enough shortstop. I would want him to play shortstop until he absolutely proved to me that he can't. I don't think he's done that yet. But whatever you do, and if you keep Mondesi around, now you create the scenario where, okay, Mondesi plays shortstop for 2 months or 2 weeks and he gets hurt. Now you're thinking about moving Witt back to shortstop. Or you still want Witt to get reps at shortstop because Mondesi might not be there next year. And now you've created this problem all over again where Bobby Witt Jr. is 2 years into his career and hasn't established himself at a position. So I don't care, Soren, that much about Mondesi. I care about Witt, and then let me figure out Mondesi.
Yeah. Well, but when you constantly sticking a binky in Adalberto Mondesi's mouth, you can't do that. And that's what they did last year. Here they had their number one prospect, and they immediately put him to third. And to which Randy's made a compelling case, and there is a reason to put him over at third base. If like here's one, know that Bobby Witt Jr. can't play very well defensively.
I'm not sold on that yet.
Right. Well,
if that were the reason why they put him at third base, it would be legitimate. The problem.
Thank you. That's it. This isn't.
Yes.
Right.
They moved him to shortstop. That if they had just left him there and moved Nicky Lopez, who, like you said, was probably the best defensive shortstop in the league the year before at shortstop, and just said when Mondesi got hurt, wait, you're still our third baseman, I don't think we wouldn't be having this discussion. But I completely agree. Jerking Bobby Witt around because of Adalberto Mondesi's availability is insanity.
Well, and it just before you move off that, it speaks to the fact that they don't seem to be able to get it right with their own people. Right. That's what's frustrating is you have to know your people better than anybody else.
Right.
Like you've got to realize when a guy's coming up and it's Daniel Lynch. We all hope he's going to turn the corner. But Daniel Lynch is tops on the prospect list and 6'7", left-handed, throwing 95, 96. Everything's there. You move him because you go, you know what? Between the ears, it's not all going to click. And you move him before he becomes exposed. But when you don't know, and that's what it feels like with any prospect that comes through the Royals organization is they have no idea. And so it's a 6-year pass. Brad Keller, it's like we got a little something out of the Rule 5 with Brad Keller. And Brad Keller will, again, $5.5 million. What was it? What did he get?
5.775. Yeah.
$5.8 million, is what he gets. Because they don't know. They still don't know. We got to give him $5.8 million. They're going to put him into the rotation. I assume they're not giving him $5.8 million to be at the back of the bullpen or to be in the middle of the bullpen. And they're doing it because, oh my God, we can't afford to lose somebody. They might be good because they don't know who's good.
Wait, somebody on this podcast, the one with the least hair, I think, compared Brad Keller to Kevin Appier. I could swear somebody did that.
Are we going back to all of our takes from 5 years ago? Why don't we go back to like
I'm
arguing
making
over
sure you
Joey
never
Hamilton
invite
in
me back.
1994? Yeah, clearly it's working. I'll give you
No,
that.
seriously though, Keller's not the guy I think of, Soren, when I think of this. I think of MJ Melendez, where I think it's the same issue where they don't know what he is. And if you don't know what he is at this point, after he's had 4 months in the major leagues and you've evaluated him, I mean, he was a 16-year-old sign. He's been in your org now for 7 years, 8 years. You've got to know what he is by now. And this gets to your central point. This is something they didn't do a very good job of under Moore. That has to change. You have to know your talent, as you say, better than anybody else.
Yeah, I completely agree that Melendez really is. We've discussed this winter, is really the canary in the coal mine, I think, going forward. Because if they continue to play him, if he continues to be a left fielder / catcher and continues to be a bad defender at both positions, that's a sign they've learned absolutely nothing.
Let me ask you this, though.
Continue.
Going back to the Mondesi win issue, is Melendez a left fielder because he's a bad catcher, or is Melendez a bad fielder because Salvador Perez exists?
Well,
because I haven't been able to read that yet.
The thing with Melendez, at least right now, and I know this is a touchy subject for you, but runs are runs. MJ Melendez's framing ability is just horrendous. I mean, Salvador Perez is bad at it. Melendez is worse.
Which, by the way, can we say now that with an old guard and then a new prospect, that maybe we should look at the catching coaches?
Yes.
If this is a constant theme with Royals catching. Anyway, go ahead, Rany.
I mean, it's the same point where it's like you have to acknowledge there's a problem before you fix it. And if you're not looking at the data, which says that framing exists, it's important, and that your guys are bad at it. And I mean, this isn't the even 20% of the pitching problem, but a non-zero part of the Royals finishing dead last in the league last year in basically every pitching category was because of their framing. I mean, it is part.
But you're conceding that we're going to have bad framing. We're just deciding which the young guy or the old guy is going to be doing the framing.
Well, and the argument, the reason to stick with Melendez behind the plate, I think, is if you are convinced, and there's some momentum in this direction, that we are going to see an automated strike zone in the major leagues here in the next 2 to 3 years. Yes. Yeah, we're all praying for it. I mean, the just announcement this past week that they're going to have the hardware in basically every AAA park. And I think it's an experiment. They're going to have half the games with an automated strike zone, half the games with a challenge system, because it works so well in football. Like it's just if you have the technology, just get the calls right.
Yeah. It's like the replay system initially. It's trying to not go all the way with a good system and instead interjecting, making the managers, or in this case the players now, actually officiate the game. I know that's a sidetrack, but the point you're making is real. Like, how much longer are we going to care about a player's framing?
Because if I knew for a fact that framing ceases to be an issue in 2 years, even maybe 3 years, I put Melendez behind the plate and we run with it, because that bat and is a good arm, right? The non-framing part of his job, I think he handles adequately well as a catcher. And you give me that bat, even what he hit last year as a catcher would make him probably a top 5 catcher in the American League.
But I think it's a lot of value to give up, because it's not like there's a catcher to shortstop path here. It's catcher or left field, which is an enormous amount of value.
Exactly. And that is the danger with catchers in general. Bad defensive catcher or borderline defensive catchers, you don't have that easy out.
But this is it. This is why you figure that out when he's in AA and he explodes and you go, yeah, but he's never going to actually put the mask on in a game that matters for us. And you trade him. You trade him when he's dead. They won't trade anybody out of their minor league system. No one ever gets traded. If they trade somebody out of their minor league system, they are trash. Like they have no ability to play whatsoever. And that's what's so frustrating. And that's what needs to change is the willingness to identify and give up and say, it's not happening with this guy, right? Like Matt put it up there. He said, the Royals have always been terrified of the Jeff Bagwell for Larry Anderson trade. Like they're so worried they're going to give somebody up and then it's going to come back to haunt them that they don't give anybody up. But that's paralysis, right? Like you're not going anywhere. If you get, like, somewhere along the way, it should have been like, okay, Mondesi's going to center field. If Bobby Witt Jr. can't play shortstop, in his second year, it should have been out to center field, right? Here you go, or over to third base. It's not that hard. Like the only time they move anybody is like, okay, Moustakas is kind of a fat ass. He's moving to third. But they drafted him as a short. And they gave him like 5 minutes at short, and they gave Billy Butler like 5 minutes. And that's actually predating this regime or Dayton Moore's regime. But they gave him 5 minutes at third base and then said, okay. And then they farted around with him in the outfield for 10 minutes when he got to the big leagues. I mean, it's that kind of thing. It's like, how do you not find an outfielder? There are more outfielders than there are position players, and they can't find an outfielder to save their life. Right?
I think this is one of the issues with Melendez now is that if they have to move him to left field, it does crowd out. It's a fairly interesting crop of players right now that I'd like to see get reps out there. One of the reasons I don't want to see them move Melendez is because I want to see what Drew Waters is, and I want to see what Eduardo Olivares is if they haven't DFA'd him in the last 15 minutes. There's a center field prospect that you've named that I keep forgetting. I mean, there's just a lot of outfielders here right now, so that's another reason I want Melendez behind the plate. But I want to make a point, Soren, to the idea that they don't trade anybody. It's funny because that championship team was bolstered by trading of prospects who really never became anything. Sean Manaea turned into a decent 3 for like 3 or 4 years. But the trade they made for Cueto was the left-handed, the fireball left-handed.
Brandon Finnegan, who had success with them in 2014 and then never pitched well again. Cody Reed. And let's not forget there's the Will Myers trade. The one time they did trade a guy at the peak of his value because they correctly had calculated that his prospect status was overrated. That led to some people, and at this moment I'm going to put on a hot dog outfit and say we're all trying to find the guy who did this. Some people were very critical of that trade, and it worked out beautifully for them. 2 years ago, I will say that they traded Khalil Lee and Franchi Cordero. Cordero wasn't exactly a prospect then, but was still a guy who's was very short major league track record. Some of his
he's a StatCast darling.
Yeah, were insane. Took those two guys, 2 young pitchers, and traded him for Andrew Benintendi. And that trade has worked out beautifully for them. So they do it occasionally, and it actually works very well when they do. They need to do more of it.
That's what I'm saying, Soren. I think the track record shows that they don't get burnt when they trade these guys.
Yeah, well, but they've done so few of it. It's like, and to me, it's always been at times where they were forced into it. Now they want to say differently, but Ned Yost told me, the only reason the Zach Greinke trade was made was because Zach Greinke said, no, I want out, and then like forced their hand. That ended up being a big
one of the great trades. Basically, the best thing Moore ever did. Literally,
yes,
the best movie ever made.
And there are people from that regime that now tell me no, that wasn't the case. But Ned Yost said, well, we were getting ready to go to spring training, and we told Zach, listen, this is what we're going to do. And Zach's like, no, I'm not buying in. I'm out. I'm not going to be there. And so then they engineered the trade for him. So, I mean, there's a case, there's at least some reference points that say that they, had to be shoved into doing what they ultimately did, which was a good move. What's a realistic timetable, Joe? What should Royals fans expect from this ball club? J.J.Picollo got kind of caught in his opening press conference where he said they were making changes because, gone was the pitching coach, gone was the manager, because they had much bigger expectations than what was delivered in beforehand. Then later they said, well, you lose 97 games, you're not almost there. And Danny Klinkscale said, well, so what is this team? Did you miss on what your expectations were going in? Or no, this is still a club that you think should be at 500. Or no, this is a team that's a long way away and you're just beginning the journey. What do you see for this team, and what's a realistic timetable?
First of all, I don't care what numbers he had based on last year's performance. That wasn't a good baseball team. It just wasn't. Not 29 years. Can we safely say that? If for no other reason, there are a lot more teams in the playoffs and will be even more probably in future years. You're just going to you're not going to have the long playoff droughts that you used to have. You're going to accidentally fall into an 84 win team that makes the playoffs. And I think that's a realistic goal, maybe as soon as 24. Like, could I see the Royals by doing things? How can I put this? The Royals, a lot of what we talk about the Royals is elective. Them just deciding we don't want to go out and get the best talent, whether it's a money thing or we don't think we're ready yet. I don't know what it is, but like the players they have right now in the organization, I could see that being the bottom, 20 roster spots on an 84, 85 win team. I'm a lot higher on the offense than I think other people are. We talked about this when I was in your studio. I really do like the hitters. I think they've got to sort out who's going to play where. But I look at the position player core here. Randy, what's one of our favorite teams?
You mean the 1995 Cleveland Indians?
I was going to say the 89 Orioles.
Oh, okay, yes.
Not a lot of superstar talent there, but it all came together at once. I could see the Royals being that team, that position player core in 23 and 24. And similarly, they had a really bad pitching staff. Dave Johnson and Jeff Ballard and a bunch of guys.
But a phenomenal defense that made the pitching staff.
And this team is potentially a very good defensive team as well. So, yeah, I think 24, they should be aiming with 6 teams making the playoffs. And with 3 or 4 teams in the American League not even trying, they should be aiming to be an above 500 team in 2024.
Can you explain to me how they should be a very good defensive team? Based on what?
Well, some of this is moving. Okay, I'll concede to Rany. If you wanted to play Witt at third, Lopez at short, you're going to figure out second base. I don't know if it's going to be
Michael Massey's got actually.
If we're talking about defense, he's very good defensively.
Yeah.
Right. And you guys see the outfield more than I do, but I think Drew Waters can play center and not be bad at it. You still got Taylor out there. Talk about guys who should be traded, Soren. I mean, I don't know what a 32-year-old center fielder is still doing here, but I think then you're talking about putting a potentially very good defensive team on the field. Kyle Isbell is a plus defensive right fielder. I mean, there's a lot of good defensive players. Yeah, Melendez has to play somewhere. Maybe
Melendez really is the fly in the ointment because wherever he is, he's like a defensive liability.
I get that, but he's also a 23-year-old who hits like that.
Yeah, no.
I don't call him a fly in the ointment.
And I don't know what you do. Because, like you said, he's the one impediment to actually having a really, really good defense.
Right. So you play 6 1s and a 4 in left field. That's a strat reference. just for Randy. But no, I 23. They're probably the pitching just isn't going to be good enough. But could you go into the market next year? Figure out who are your guys this year, and who are the tradable guys. Go out into the market and get a number 2 somehow, whether it's through money, through talent. But if next offseason is what this offseason has been, I think then you've got to say, what are we doing? But I think this core of offensive position player talent, I'll call it, should absolutely be able to contend for a wild card in 2024. Me being the optimist on here is really just.
I was going to say, when we introduced you that in 30 years we've agreed on the Royals maybe once, I might have to up that to twice now. This is kind of terrifying because Joe's saying exactly what I've been saying for most of this winter, which is there's no reason why this team cannot be at least have a dream of contention, a dream of a playoff spot 1 year from now. And this winter has been a disappointment. But if there is
pitching,
well, that's what they have to watch.
That's what you've got 1,440 innings to answer that question this year, and then you've got seriously, guys. I mean, I don't want to tick off Soren. I really don't. But there's at least $60 million between the Royals' 2024 projected payroll and what they should reasonably be spending. I'm not asking them to be Steve Cohen. I'm saying what they can reasonably be spending. That's pitching.
No, I get that. What's the red flag? I mean, I think we all agree that J.J.Picollo, this is not a 4-year evaluation process when you're coming in, and especially when you're not blowing it all up. Had you blown everything out underneath you, then I think it'd be a lot easier to say, okay, listen, we're starting from scratch. I mean, this is scorched earth and this is ground zero, but it's not. He's staying the course. He's sticking up for some old buds. And so what's the red flag? Where do you look at it and you go, okay, this is where it's time to eject on this idea?
I think it's tough because Quatraro is going to be making a lot of these decisions. And I don't necessarily – I think JJ's role is to let him do that this year, and with Sweeney as well. So I don't know how much of what we see this year should be blamed on JJ. And I don't want to make excuses for him. I personally think they should have done clean house. I think they should have started over with a new GM entirely, somebody who wasn't attached to the prior administration. Having done it this way, though, I think it's going to be hard to evaluate JJ this year because you're turning the team over to new hands. I don't think you want him terribly involved in this process. I want the new guys to look at the talent that they have and make their decisions. Again, most front offices now, it's a collaborative space. And I'm sure the Royals will be a collaborative space. It's after midnight here on the East Coast. But I think it's a tough thing to do to pin Piccolo's future on the Royals winning 77 or 80 or 83 games this year. I think it's a tough call.
Piccolo.
Yeah, I'm a writer, man. This is why I'm not on TV.
When, though? I'll ask it again. When?
Is it really Piccolo?
It is Piccolo,
is.
yes.
All right.
J.J. Picollo.
I'm getting that. Because Rob Piccolo, the shortstop.
Yeah, I that's what you said it. That was my first thought. We were going back to the 1980 Oakland A's.
JJ walked more last year, actually, than Rob did.
But seriously, like when? When, if you're John Sherman, put yourself in that role. When do you go, okay, I've given this enough time?
I think you could reasonably do it next year. I just think it'd be a tough beat to give him the role this year in a year. And we've seen the win, like Soren, like I said, we go back to what I said.
He did carry the title general manager last year. I mean, let's not,
Let's go back to the start of this conversation. I thought there was going to be more activity this winter. Again, I'm the guy who screamed, sign Trey Turner, and everybody laughed at me. Fine, I'll wear that. But they didn't do anything. So I don't know if that's a reason to fire Piccolo, excuse me. Piccolo. What's the
Piccolo?
That's the Piccolo.
Yeah.
I think it's a hard evaluation. Like, there's a better argument, I think, for firing him now after not doing anything for 2 months and retaining Ryan O'Hearn and all that weirdness. Then there will be in 6 months when he still really hasn't done anything. It's awkward for me.
Right.
But having retained him, let's put it this way: if you've already retained him, what are you going to learn over the next year?
Right. And I think that, to me, the fact that they've been so quiet on the free agent market this winter, if that is because Piccolo has gone to ownership, it's like we don't need to spend it. We can just bring in Jordan Lyles and Ryan Yarbrough and we're ready to go. Then yes, that's merits firing. I'm assuming this is a collaborative effort with ownership. They don't want to spend the money. If they don't want to spend the money, I do feel like if they go out and have a really bad year next year and end up firing Piccolo, then they're essentially setting him up as the fall guy for their unwillingness to get more involved.
So you hired Dombrowski, who's the owner whisperer, who gets everybody to spend money. Let me ask you two guys, because when I was out there in September, there was this lightness, this optimism. Do you feel differently about John Sherman today than you did 4 months ago?
That's a really good question.
I
stumped the guys who have access.
Not stumped, but
yes.
Yeah, you do. Okay, I was gonna say I'm still kind of in this like wait and see mode, but I've been waiting and not seeing.
Some of it is stuff I can't. It's behind the scenes stuff. It's one behind the scene thing that I think is a negative. But could turn, could change. We're gonna find out. What I think is listen, but I'm very much for him as the owner, in the sense that he's very much for Kansas City. He's very much for baseball. I think if he doesn't have it right with J.J.Picollo, he knows what right looks like. And I think he'll see it. I think he'll swallow hard and say, okay, I got to make another change. I am still optimistic that there is a plan here. Like I said, that it's to take a year with the new people, see what all we got, and then that there'll be some more changes that come about. I'm optimistic about that, but I do believe he has Kansas City in his best interest, which is, this is a baseball discussion, but he's going to be asking for a lot of money from the city, from the community, for a new ballpark. And I don't know how he can do it with a team that's losing 100 games again. Like, and that's what I wonder. I think there has to be an end game. I don't think the guy's just cheap and he's just putting money in his pocket, or they're trying to recoup what they lost for the pandemic, recoup their purchase price, the $1 billion that the ownership group spent for it. I don't think that's what's going on. I don't believe him to be that kind of guy. So I view him differently now. I've become more educated about him. I still think he's the right guy. I think he'll ultimately do a good job, but
when do you need to see more?
That was the question I was giving you,
I wasn't about. I mean, just about the owner, because I was talking about the baseball team. I'm asking you as the owner, if he goes into, if a year from now we're talking about them signing the 2024 editions of Jordan Lyles and Ryan Yarbrough.
So let me add a little texture to this, because I think he's getting an education about being an owner. It's one thing to ride shotgun in Cleveland.
Absolutely.
Now you're the guy and you make all the decisions. And I've talked to a lot of people. He's got to deal with a lot of politics, a lot of stuff that's going on the stadium thing. And he's pushing it now. the lease isn't even up till 31, but everyone seems to agree that he kind of wants to get this done by 26, that he wants it on a ballot in August, which is impossible. It's not going to happen. And he's getting that education right now. If I'm wrong, I will admit I'm wrong. But he's getting that education right now. And so part of me feels like he is probably overwhelmed with what's going on the business side of things. And I think part of the reason why JJ is there is like, I don't know that he had the time. He felt like he had the time to go fully invest in a search and everything that's going on there. And so that's a little bit scary. But I do think J.J.Picollo is a smart baseball guy that has had different opinions than what Dayton Moore had and deserves a chance to try to make it go. The question is how long.
Tell me how that has manifested over the last, I know we're over an hour already. Tell me how that's manifested over the last 3 months.
How what is manifest? The
different opinions that J.J.Picollo has had.
Picollo?
Over,
I've seen it. Conversations with people.
Okay, that's fair. But would you say that we've seen it yet?
Conversation and past conversations.
Okay.
I mean, they're like, hey, this is going on, and I think.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but what you're saying is you're basing this on interactions and information, as opposed to anything we've seen implemented over the last, since
I believe J.J.Picollo is his own man, but he's stood at the right hand of Dayton Moore for a long time. There's a lot of similarities there as well. And my hope is that you go get the Rays guy and the Guardians guy, add that to J.J.Picollo. And so there are things that Dayton Moore did very well. And there is something to be said for loving up your players and believing in them. And I think Kansas City is different than New York. There does need to be a love affair between the team and the fans and the fans.
Well, I can go get a decent meal at this hour, and I'm betting you can't.
Yeah, that's I'm not going to argue that because I've lived in Vegas and I know the difference as well of what a 24-hour town is. But I'm fearful. Like the easier thing to do, the more likely successful thing would have been to just blow the whole thing up. And
I don't think they had the roster for it. They have so many young players. I don't think there was a path to blowing it all up.
I think one, you would have set different expectations with the fan base. I mean, I think if this team, what happens if they don't pitch better? If they come out of the gates and they don't pitch better,
they lose.
And the fans. I mean, and
what
again,
happens to the stadium conversation if they go out and lose 95 games?
That's exactly my point.
Well, this is why, to me, you can say a lot of things about John Sherman. It's hard for me to say he's cheap when he authorized $8.5 million a year for Jordan Lyles. Like we've gone over
because he did it in lieu of authorizing $13 million a year for a major league pitcher.
Right. And this is my point. And we don't have time for a full conversation here, but the Jordan Lyles thing is what sticks in my craw, because if it is a matter of ownership not being willing to spend more for a better pitcher, that's a big red flag to me, not only because it's money wasted, but it surprises me. The Royals' lack of movement this winter shocks me the most because it is occurring concomitantly with all of this, rumor grapevine stuff about them wanting a new stadium. I do not understand how you can simultaneously be trying to prep the groundwork to get your fans to vote on a $2 billion project for a stadium while simultaneously not spending money on any player that moves the needle with your fan base. So if the Jordan Lyles thing is we're not willing to spend the money for a real free agent, that's a real red flag on ownership. If Jordan Lyles is J.J.Picollo convincing ownership that Jordan Lyles is our man, that's a red flag from the front office side.
There's just no way to spin the Jordan Lyles thing that doesn't look bad for somebody.
Is there a way? I mean, that's why we brought you in. Maybe I'm too close to this. Is there any reason that Jordan Lyles contract makes sense?
No, because the Royals actually have volume when it comes to pitching. They have a bunch of guys that can run the problem. Yep. Picking up Yarbrough was supposed to actually solve that. They have 7 or 8 or 9 of these fourth starter types. Jordan Lyles is just taking innings away from them. He's not really making you bet. Look, if you want to tell me Jordan Lyles,
listen, it creates competition. And I'm with you on it being cheap, and I don't get the 2-year thing. I don't.
How does it create competition? Jordan Lyles just got a 2-year contract for $17 million. He's got a job.
It creates competition because, by all accounts, Brady Singer wouldn't throw his changeup, And then Brady Singer's not the guy. I'm just giving an example of a year or two ago. He would not throw the changeup at all. He still doesn't throw it much, but it's at least there and something he can showcase and flip up there from time to time. And they couldn't get him to do it. They finally.
How are you tying this back to Jordan Lyles?
But so here's my point: is like there was no one else, so Brady Singer kept getting run out there,
Okay.
and then because they had literally no one else. Or then who's the other guy? Well, it's Chris Bubich, and Chris Bubich won't throw what they want him to throw. Now, listen. By my read, Bubich is the one that's ahead of the curve, and the Royals are behind it. They won't let him throw the new pitch that he likes, the slider, because they want him to command these other pitches better. That's its own house of horrors.
Right, and you're hoping that the new management team was going to solve a lot of these.
It's going to solve that, but my point is, whatever it is, listen, a shitty plan's better than no plan. Okay. And so if your plan is you've got to do this and you don't have anybody else to put on the mound, so you have to keep sending Chris Bubich out there to pitch the way you don't want him to pitch, that's a problem. And so if now we know there will be injuries, if now you've got it to where guys have to throw well and have to throw the way you want them to throw, or they don't get on the mound, you at least can make them earn it, for lack of a better term. And I think this organization just kind of gifts the big leagues to guys that aren't really that good. You know,
they've done that with Jordan Lyles too now.
Yes. I don't love it. The only thing the only thing I can find is it gives
Jordan Lyles is getting, I believe he's getting more guaranteed money than Seth Lugo is from the Padres. Right.
Yeah. Well, who was it? Wade Miley.
Wade Miley was the guy we talked
Smiley
about.
Is out there. I mean,
that's the thing. It's like every argument you're making, they're valid arguments, except that is an argument for signing a pitcher. It's not an argument for signing.
The only way this offseason
not for 217 anyway.
Yeah. The only way that we end up accepting this offseason as anything more than they were spending their time looking for coaches and had no time to actually dig into the players and personnel, and
that's what the money is for.
Playing catch up. I know, but the only way is if Jordan Lyles comes out here and has some career year, because Quatrero and Sweeney get a hold of him, and look, he's it's the who was it, Kyle Hendricks story. Isaac Hendricks, who was it who never threw his breaking ball, then he threw it 85% of the time, and it was great.
Clay Hall, or like 30% of pitchers in baseball right now.
Yes,
I will say this: if you're right, Jordan Lyles better be on a different team on August 1st. Because if Jordan Lyles goes out and has 15 of the best starts of his life, good God, you've got to trade him. And I think actually to kind of go back to the Piccolo thing, I think the trade deadline is going to be a big part of the evaluation here.
Yeah.
Like, can he execute a trade deadline that makes them better in 24?
Yeah. I think that's part of it. But you know what? They could move up the trade deadline 6 months early for Michael A. Taylor. Like there are evaluations. We don't have to wait until July 31st for some of this to happen. And that's another thing. I mean, we just talked about the not incredible, but like the relative depth in outfield that they have right now, and not knowing what to do with Melendez. And meanwhile, Michael A. Taylor coming back-to-back Gold Glove winner, like there is value there, and center fielders have been already traded this winter for a decent prospect package, and there's still teams that need one.
He's not just a glove. I mean, he's a 240 hitter. He's got some pop. He steals bases. I mean, that's a 2-3-win player.
An average minus hitter with really good defense at a key defensive position. And that's the thing, for all of our frustration about the lack of free agent signings, they also haven't made any trades. They made some very minor ones. And they just seem to be asleep. And couple that with the perception that they are so focused on the stadium, and it's hard not to think that they're so focused on it that they're not actually attending to their baseball team's needs. And you can't do that. You have to be able to do both. You have to be able to chew gum and walk at the same time.
Soren's got it right. They're putting the cart before the horse there. You got to fix the baseball team before you get the stadium.
Yep.
Yeah. I agree.
Absolutely. Joe, it's always great talking to you, buddy. We really appreciate the time, and we know it's even an hour later for you. So thank you very much for joining us, and certainly we're smarter for having had you on.
And if I may make a pitch for his newsletter,
yes, please.
Joe Sheehan Baseball Newsletter. I personally don't have the time to follow the other 29 teams in the sport as much as I used to, back when baseball was more of a full-time job than my second job that it is now. But the one way that I keep up with the sport as a whole is by reading his newsletter 3-4 times a week. He will send stuff out. And I feel like I'm a fairly informed fan by reading nothing else but what Joe puts out as his analysis. It is incredible stuff. You really should subscribe. Yeah, what Joe Sheehan
Newsletter.com.
JoeSheehan.com. There we go. It's probably important to get the URL right.
I'm glad you got my PayPal, Rany. Thank you for that.
Yep.
And thanks, guys. I'm a regular. I listen every week. Even that crazy 2-parter with the all-time Royals teams that Randy got a bunch of things wrong on. I thank you for having me. It's been just a joy having you guys. Thank you very much.
You're the man. The pleasure is ours. Remember, we're brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving all of Kansas City. You got parking lot problems? Not anymore. Not if you call Gann Asphalt and Concrete, 816-484-3338. Find them online at gannasphalt.com. One contractor, all things parking lots. Great folks. Tell them you heard about them on the Kaufman Corner podcast. For the good doctor, Rany Jazayerli. For Joe Sheehan, I'm Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us here on